Good evening and welcome to the Sleep to Law series. Tonight we will talk about The Shining, the haunting tale of the Torrance family and their isolation within the snowbound Overlook Hotel in the Colorado Rockies. If you enjoy listening to these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. Before we begin, I have a question for you. Do you think you would be able to spend an entire winter alone in a massive hotel? Let me know in the comments below. Now let us turn the page. Chapter 1. The story begins not with a scream, but with the quiet, suffocating friction of a job interview. We meet Jack Torrance, a man vibrating with suppressed rage and desperate pride, sitting across from Stuart Ullman, the manager of the Overlook Hotel. The psychological landscape here is immediately hostile. Ullman is described as a small, officious man, the type of bureaucratic gatekeeper who wears a red carnation to avoid being mistaken for an undertaker, though in a way he is arranging a funeral. Jack needs this job. He is a man stripped of his teaching position, his reputation and his dignity due to a cascade of failures fueled by alcohol and a volatile temper. But as Ullman questions him about his wife, Wendy, and his son Danny, Jack's internal monologue is a venomous stream of resentment. He hates Ullman, he hates the patronizing tone, but he smiles the PR smile, a mask of sanity he wears to hide the rotting infrastructure of his life. Ullman isn't just hiring a caretaker, he is issuing a warning, though Jack is too blinded by arrogance to heed it. Ullman explains the isolation. The Overlook is located in the Colorado Rockies, 40 miles from the nearest town, Sidewinder. When the snow flies, the roads close. The isolation is total. Ullman reveals a grim piece of the hotel's history. A previous winter caretaker named Grady. Grady, succumbing to cabin fever, a claustrophobic reaction to isolation, murdered his 2 young daughters with a hatchet, shot his wife, and then blew his own head off. Jack dismisses this. He frames his own solitude as a romanticized opportunity to finish his play. He views himself as an intellectual superior to the stupid Grady. Here we see the tragic flaw of Jack Torrance, his belief that his intellect can conquer his demons. He admits he stopped drinking, but the craving is a phantom limb that never stops itching. Ullman, reluctant and unimpressed, hires him only because higher-ups demand it. The chapter ends with Jack's PR smile fixed in place, masking a hatred that foreshadows the violence to come. Chapter 2. We shift perspectives to Boulder, where the air is thin and the anxiety is thick. Wendy Torrance sits in their cramped apartment, watching her 5-year-old son Danny wait on the curb for his father. This isn't just a domestic scene. It is a portrait of people walking on eggshells. Wendy is a woman traumatized by her husband's past actions. She loves Jack, but she fears him. The apartment building itself mirrors their lives, smelling of sour age, filled with the sounds of neighbors fighting, a place of transient desperation. Danny is the emotional barometer of the family. He sits alone, a solemn child who understands far more than a 5-year-old should. We get a glimpse into the family's dark history. The time Jack, in a drunken rage, broke Danny's arm. This event is the bad thing, a specter that haunts Wendy's every thought. She worries about the old Volkswagen breaking down, about money, about Jack's temper. There is a profound sadness here. Wendy tries to explain to Danny why they are moving to the hotel, why his father lost his job at the prep school. She has to navigate the minefield of truth and protection, explaining that Daddy hurt a student who vandalized their car. She whitewashes the violence, but the tension remains. Danny, however, is resilient in a strange, silent way. He wants to go to the hotel because he has no friends here. He is lonely. As Wendy weeps into her tea, overwhelmed by the terror of the future, we realize that the Overlook offers them a paradox. It is their only salvation from poverty, yet it feels like walking into the mouth of a beast. They are a family unit, held together by scar tissue, heading into a winter that will test the strength of those scars. Chapter 3. Jack is taken into the bowels of the hotel by Watson, the seasonal maintenance man. If Ullman is the pristine corporate face of the Overlook, Watson is its greasy, profane gut. This chapter descends into the boiler room, a place of heat and noise that represents the subconscious of the hotel and perhaps Jack himself. The boiler is a massive, ancient beast. Watson explains the mechanics. It's old, it creeps. The pressure builds up, and if not checked daily, it could blow the hotel sky high. This is the central metaphor of the story. The pressure inside the boiler mirrors the pressure inside Jack's mind. There is no automatic shutdown. It requires constant vigilance, just like Jack's sobriety and temper. As they tour the basement, filled with rotting papers and the history of the hotel, Watson acts as a chorus of doom. He hates Ullman, calling him every profane name in the book, which bonds him slightly to Jack. But more importantly, Watson spills the secrets Ullman hid. He confirms the hotel has ghosts, or at least a history of death that refuses to stay buried. Watson tells the story of the woman in room 217. A wealthy older woman who came to the hotel with a young lover, overdosed on pills and booze and died in the tub. But she didn't stay dead. A chambermaid found her weeks later, bloated and purple, grinning in the bathtub. It's a grotesque image that plants a seed of horror in Jack's mind, even as he outwardly dismisses it as superstition. Jack is surrounded by the physical decay of the hotel, the poison bait for rats, the musty archives, the dark corners. Watson warns him to keep the pressure down, to watch the boiler. As Jack leaves the basement, the craving for alcohol hits him like a physical blow. The shame of his past, reignited by the discussion of the previous caretaker's breakdown, leaves him desperate for a drink. The basement has unsettled him, waking up the demons he is trying so hard to suppress. Chapter 4. The narrative pivots to the most crucial element, Danny's mind. We enter Shadowland. Danny is not just a bright child. He is a vessel for a power he doesn't understand. While waiting for his father, he slips into a trance. This is the Shining, though not yet named. It is a terrifying, dissociative experience. He connects with Tony, an invisible figure who is part playmate, part harbinger of doom. The text plunges us into a surreal nightmare. Danny's consciousness detaches from the Boulder street and flies into a dark, snowy future. He sees the Overlook Hotel not as a sanctuary, but as a place of death. The imagery is fragmented and violent. He sees a sign flashing poison. He sees snow burying everything, trapping them. Then the horror becomes specific. He sees a word in a mirror, redrum. He doesn't know what it means, but the dread it inspires is absolute. He sees a mallet, a roque mallet, swinging through the air, shattering walls. He hears the booming rhythmic sound of destruction. He sees a shape, a monster, hunting him down. The most terrifying part is that the monster's voice sounds familiar. It sounds like Daddy. The vision escalates. He sees the dead woman in the bathtub, blood trickling from her finger. He feels the visceral terror of being hunted in a dark hallway. The Shining shows him the potential future, madness, murder, and the total collapse of his family. When Danny snaps back to reality, he is terrified, having wet himself. But the tragedy is instantaneous. His father's car turns the corner. Jack arrives, smiling, carrying groceries. To the naked eye, it is a happy reunion. Jack hugs his son, calling him Doc. But the reader, and Danny, has just seen the truth. The bag of groceries in the seat next to Jack looked for a split second like a bloody mallet. The horror of The Shining is established here. The monster isn't waiting in the hotel. The monster is driving the car, and he loves his son, and he has no idea what he is about to become. The trap is set. Chapter 5. Phone booth. Jack Torrance stands inside the glass coffin of a telephone booth. a structure that feels less like a communication device and more like a confession box without a priest. Outside, the Colorado air is thinning, and his battered Volkswagen Beetle sits in the parking lot like a dying insect. Inside the car, his son, Danny, traces lines on road maps, unaware that his father is currently negotiating the terms of their survival. Jack is making the obligatory gratitude call to Al Shockley, a wealthy friend who secured him the interview for the Overlook Hotel job. But under the surface of this mundane conversation lies the rotting foundation of Jack's recent life. We see here the corrosive nature of Jack's pride. He stands amidst the ruins of his career, a teaching position at Stovington Prep, lost not because of incompetence, but because of a violent temper that led him to assault a student, George Hatfield. King uses this moment to strip Jack bare. He has no money, a car on its last legs, and a checking account that is barely breathing. Yet, he clings to his pride, refusing to make this call from home, where his wife, Wendy, might hear the humiliation in his voice. The conversation with Al is a dance around a graveyard. They share a dark secret, a spectre that haunts Jack more than the poverty. It creates a psychological anchor, dragging us back to a night on a country road, a memory that refuses to stay buried. They were drunk, driving Al's Jaguar, when they hit a bicycle. The description of the bicycle spinning in the darkness, its spokes shattered like bones, serves as a grim symbol of the line Jack crossed. They found the bike, but they never found the boy who was riding it. That missing body is the phantom of Jack's alcoholism, the what-if that drove him to sobriety, not out of virtue, but out of sheer terror. On the phone, Al asks if Jack is dry. Jack confirms he is, but the audience understands the fragility of this sobriety. It is built on trauma, not healing. When Jack hangs up, claiming the past is dead, he returns to the car to find Danny waiting, and here, the supernatural bleeds into the domestic. Danny, with eyes too old for his face, asks about the bad dream. He knows. Through the inexplicable connection of the shine, the boy saw the accident, the guilt, and the blood. Jack denies it, gaslighting his son to protect his own sanity, driving them away from the phone booth and toward the mountains. Chapter 6. Night Thoughts. The narrative shifts to the intimacy of the bedroom, but in a Stephen King story, even the sanctuary of sleep is invaded by the ghosts of the past. Wendy Torrance lies awake beside her sleeping husband. The physical act of lovemaking has just ended, but the emotional distance remains vast. Wendy's internal monologue offers a heartbreaking dissection of codependency. She reflects on her marriage not as a partnership, but as a series of battle scars. We learn of the best year, a time before the drinking spiraled, contrasting sharply with the horror that followed. The defining trauma of their marriage is revealed here. The night Jack, in a drunken rage, broke Danny's arm. It is the incident that nearly severed their family, a moment of violence that Wendy cannot fully forgive, yet cannot fully act upon. King paints Wendy not as a weak woman, but as one trapped by the gravity of her own history. She fears her mother, a manipulative, critical presence, more than she fears her unstable husband. She stays with Jack because the alternative is admitting defeat to a mother who predicted her failure. There is a profound psychological insight here regarding the nature of denial. Wendy suspects the truth about the hit and run involving Al Shockley. She has seen the change in Jack, the sudden, terrified sobriety. But she chooses blindness. She suppresses her intuition because the truth would shatter the fragile attempt at a fresh start. Then, there is the child. Wendy ruminates on Danny's strangeness, recalling his birth where he was born with a caul, a membrane over the face that folklore claims is a sign of second sight. She tries to rationalize Danny's knowledge of things he shouldn't know, dismissing it as luck or coincidence. But deep down in the vulnerability of the night, she feels a superstitious dread. She senses that the three of them, Jack, Wendy, and Danny, are welded together by fate. It is a fatalistic realization that their destruction, if it comes, will not come from within, but from an external force waiting for them in the high country. She drifts to sleep, hoping the hotel will be their salvation, unaware she is walking into a trap set for her son. Chapter 7. In another bedroom. The perspective shifts to the innocent, and therefore the most vulnerable. Danny wakes up in the darkness of his room, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He has been chased in his dreams, not by a monster, but by his father. The psychological horror here is palpable. The person who should be his protector is the predator in his nightmare. He calls out for Tony, the invisible friend who serves as the conduit for his visions. But the room is silent, save for the wind. King uses the environment to amplify the dread. The shadows of leaves on the ceiling twist into jungle vines, or perhaps the patterns of a hotel carpet. The atmosphere is charged with a static electricity of incoming doom. Danny goes to the window. The street is empty, but the feeling of being watched is overwhelming. The wind hisses his name. Danny. It is the first whisper of the Overlook, reaching out across the miles, tasting the boy's power. And then, the ultimate seal of their fate appears in his mind. A word flashing in the darkness, nonsensical yet terrifying. Redrum. Danny doesn't understand it yet, but the audience feels the chill. The trap is set, the family is broken, the father is teetering on the edge of sanity, and the monster in the mountains has just opened its eyes. Chapter 8. The little Volkswagen bug is dying. It wheezes and coughs, a mechanical beast struggling for oxygen as it claws its way up the spine of the Colorado Rockies. Inside, the atmosphere is a cocktail of false hope and suffocating anxiety. Jack Torrance drives with a desperate optimism, willing the car and his family's future to make this final ascent. Beside him, Wendy is a knot of nerves. She clutches a paperback she isn't reading, her mind drifting not to the scenic beauty, but to the sheer, indifferent lethality of these peaks. She thinks of the Donner Party, those settlers who turned to cannibalism when the snows trapped them in these very mountains. It is a grim foreshadowing that hangs over the car like a shroud. Nature here does not forgive mistakes, and the Torrance family is entering a landscape where the margin for error is zero. Danny, sensitive to frequencies his parents can't hear, feels the dread radiating from the landscape. As the car shudders toward the summit, the world falls away into a dizzying abyss. When they finally pull over to view the hotel, the altitude hits them physically. The Overlook Hotel sits like a throne carved into the mountainside, looking down on the world with a majestic stony silence. To Wendy it is beautiful, a cathedral of isolation. But to Danny, the view brings a wave of nausea. He sees the hotel not as a sanctuary, but as a destination of doom. The place Tony, his invisible guide, had warned him about. The place where Redrum waits. The sheer drop of the cliffs mirrors the psychological precipice the family is standing upon. The trap is set, and the beetle crawls right into the jaws. Chapter 9. They cross the threshold, and the Overlook greets them with a deceptive bustle. It is closing day, the hotel shedding its summer skin. Guests are departing, leaving the grand lobby to return to its winter hibernation. Manager Stuart Ullman is there, a man of manicured hands and false pleasantries. He is the bureaucratic face of the hotel, polite but cold, tolerating the family only because he needs a caretaker. But Danny sees past the social masks. As he sits in the lobby, the noise of the hotel isn't just luggage and chatter, it is a psychic cacophony. He watches a wealthy, older guest, Mrs. Brandt, make a scene about her credit card, but his mind pierces her skull. He hears her raw, grotesque thoughts, a flash of lust for a young hotel employee. It is a jarring moment for a 5-year-old, a glimpse into the sordid, hidden appetites of adults. The hotel amplifies these hidden things. Outside, the foreshadowing thickens. Jack points out the topiary garden, hedges clipped into the shapes of lions, dogs, and rabbits. To Jack, they are just plants needing maintenance. To the reader, and perhaps to Danny's subconscious, they are dormant beasts waiting for the sun to go down. The playground, too, sits empty and expectant. The isolation begins to settle in. The road back to civilization is a thin black snake that will soon be buried under 10 feet of snow. The hotel is emptying out, draining the life from its halls, preparing to feed on the only fresh meat remaining. The Torrances. Chapter 10. Enter Dick Halloran. The chef is a tall, imposing figure, but unlike Ullman, he radiates a genuine, albeit weary warmth. He takes Wendy and Danny on a tour of the kitchen, a cavernous room of stainless steel and industrial potential. The sheer scale of the provisions is overwhelming. Freezers stocked with carcasses of beef, pork, and lamb. Enough food to feed an army, or to sustain a siege. Wendy is awestruck, but the subtext is chilling. The abundance of food emphasizes just how long they will be alone. There is no popping out to the store. This is it. Halloran guides them through the walk-in lockers, the cold air puffing from their mouths like ghosts. He jokes about the food, trying to lighten the mood, but the reality of their confinement is inescapable. He mentions the rat poison, a detail that seems trivial, but speaks to the cruelty of the management. Ullman prefers to kill with poison rather than humane traps. It is a subtle hint at the toxicity of the environment, but the true connection happens between the cook and the boy. Halloran calls Danny Doc, a nickname Jack uses. It's a slip, or perhaps a signal. There is a silent frequency running between the black man and the white child, a hum of recognition that goes unnoticed by the parents. As they leave the kitchen, the hotel seems to hold its breath. The stage is fully dressed. The props, the food, the poison, the boiler, the isolation are all in place. Now the players must take their positions. Chapter 11. The final act of the arrival is the most critical. Outside, amidst the biting wind of the coming winter, Halloran asks Danny to help him with his bags. It is a pretext. Once they are alone in the sanctuary of Halloran's car, the truth comes out. Halloran knows. He knows Danny is different, because he is different too. He calls it the shining, a psychic ability to see what was, what is, and what might be. He asks Danny to demonstrate his power, and the boy, hesitant at first, unleashes a mental shout that nearly knocks the cook unconscious. It is a revelation. Halloran has a flashlight, but Danny has a supernova. The old cook realizes this boy is the most powerful receiver he has ever encountered, a lighthouse in the psychic dark. This terrifies him, because he knows what the Overlook is. Halloran shares his own history with the shine, the smell of oranges that presaged a tragic accident, the glimpses of the future. But more importantly, he warns Danny about the past. He explains that the hotel is like a bad history book, where the pictures sometimes move. He specifically warns Danny to stay away from room 217. It is a specific, dread-inducing command. He tries to comfort the boy, telling him that these ghosts are like nightmares, scary but unable to physically hurt him. This is the great tragic irony of the scene. Halloran is lying, perhaps even to himself, hoping to protect the boy's mind. But he senses the malevolence of the hotel is stronger than mere pictures. As he drives away, leaving the small boy alone on the porch of the massive brooding structure, Halloran is gripped by fear. He looks back at the topiary animals, and for a fleeting second, the doubt consumes him. He has left a lamb in a den of sleeping wolves. The Overlook has swallowed them whole, and as the car disappears, the silence of the mountains clamps down, sealing the Torrance family inside their fate. Chapter 12. The transition of power at the Overlook Hotel begins not with a handshake, but with a departure. As the seasonal staff filters out, Wendy Torrance feels the isolation settling in, a heavy blanket of silence that muffles the world outside. There is a primal jealousy here, too. She watches the easy, unspoken bond between Jack and Danny, a closed circuit she often feels excluded from. But as the lobby clears, leaving only the core players, the atmosphere shifts from a bustling resort to a mausoleum waiting for its new tenants. Ullman, officious and eager to leave, corrals the family for the grand tour. It is a ritual of handover, but the hotel seems to be the one actually taking charge. They enter the elevator, a copper and brass cage that serves as the hotel's spine. When Jack makes a dark joke about the Titanic, it lands poorly with Ullman, but the comparison is apter than Jack realizes. They are boarding a luxury vessel doomed to strike an iceberg of supernatural malice, and there are no lifeboats here. The tour moves top down, starting at the third floor. The hallway rug is a deep blue, woven with black silhouettes of a jungle, a surreal predatory landscape that suggests the hotel is a wild thing disguised by civilization. Ullman unlocks the presidential suite. While the adults marvel at the view of the Rockies, Danny Torrance stares at the wallpaper. Here the lore darkens significantly. Danny's shine, his psychic sensitivity, acts as a blacklight, revealing the stains of history. He doesn't just see a room, he sees a slaughterhouse. Splatters of blood and grey brain matter clot the striped wallpaper, the psychic residue of a gangland execution long past. It is a terrifying hallucinations, a surreal etching of death. But Danny, conditioned by his parents' desire for normalcy, swallows the scream. He looks away, and the blood vanishes. He looks back, and it returns, fresh and running. He realizes that the hotel is like a bad picture book. Scary, but theoretically unable to hurt him. It is a childish rationalization that the Overlook will spend the winter dismantling. They move through the labyrinthine corridors. Ullman points out rooms where celebrities slept, Marilyn Monroe, Truman Capote, trying to sell the glamour. But Danny is fixated on a fire extinguisher. To his eyes, the coiled hose looks like a sleeping snake, a predator waiting to strike. It is a subtle foreshadowing. The hotel's infrastructure is alive and malevolent. The tour descends to the Torrances' living quarters on the ground floor. It's an apartment meant for help, serviceable but drab, situated directly over the kitchen. Danny discovers a dumbwaiter, a shaft connecting their home to the bowels of the hotel, a literal throat for the building. Finally, the tour concludes back in the lobby with Watson, the maintenance man. This is the most crucial handover of all, the boiler. The Overlook's heating system is old and temperamental. Watson warns Jack that the boiler creeps. The pressure builds insidiously and must be manually dumped twice a day. If Jack forgets, the hotel explodes. It is a mechanical heart that requires constant nursing, a ticking bomb placed in the hands of a man prone to losing focus. As Watson leaves, stepping out into the autumn wind, the silence clamps down for good. Danny watches the truck disappear and feels a desolate, crushing loneliness. The tether to the world is cut. Chapter 13. The family stands on the porch, a tableau of vulnerability against the backdrop of the Rockies. Ullman delivers his final instructions, May 12th, not a day earlier, not a day later, and then flees. He drives a Lincoln, a symbol of the comfort he is returning to, leaving the Torrances with a rusting Volkswagen and a hotel that seems to grow in size as soon as the manager departs. This moment marks the psychological turning point. With the authority figures gone, the Overlook sheds its mask of hospitality. The leaves skitter across the parking lot like dry bones. Jack feels a shrinking sensation, a recognition that his own life force is dwarfed by the sullen, inanimate power of the building. The hotel is now the dominant organism in the ecosystem. Wendy notices Jack's nose running in the cold, a mundane detail that grounds them in human frailty before they retreat inside, closing the door against the wind, sealing themselves in the jar. Chapter 14. October 20th. The weather has been deceptively golden, a false spring before the brutal winter. Jack is on the roof, replacing rotten shingles. It's a moment of therapeutic labor. The rhythm of the work soothes his troubled mind, allowing him to rewrite the narrative of his own life just as he rewrites his play. But the piece is shattered when he uncovers a wasp nest. He is stung. The pain is sharp and immediate, but the psychological reaction is far more profound. As he examines the swelling finger and the angry nest tucked into the flashing, Jack spirals into introspection. He begins to view the nest as a symbol of his entire existence. King gives us a terrifying look into Jack's internal defense mechanisms here. Jack Torrance views himself as a victim of circumstance, a man in the passive mode. He reflects on his alcoholism and his temper, not as flaws he cultivated, but as traps he fell into. He thinks of himself as a man who unwittingly stuck his hand into the great wasp's nest of life. This delusion is anchored in the memory of George Hatfield, a student from his time at Stovington Prep. This backstory is critical lore. George was a golden boy, a jock with a stutter that only emerged during high-pressure debates. Jack had cut him from the team, sparking a feud. Jack remembers the confrontation in the parking lot. He caught George slashing the tires of his Volkswagen. In Jack's memory, he was righteous. He remembers telling George to take his medicine. He remembers the haze of red rage. He beat the boy nearly to death, an assault that lost him his teaching job and sent him spiraling toward the Overlook. Yet even now, perched on the roof, Jack refuses to accept the title of villain. He insists to himself that he didn't hate George. He was just reacting. He believes he is a nice guy with a broken circuit breaker. It is a dangerous level of denial. The hotel feeds on this specific frequency of resentment, the feeling of being unfairly persecuted. Jack resolves to destroy the nest. He climbs down, retrieves a bug bomb, and prepares to gas the insects. It is an act of petty vengeance that mirrors his approach to life. Eliminate the irritant, assert dominance, and claim victory. He tells himself, "I'm getting better." Even as he plans to kill, he believes he can turn the passive into the active, unaware that in the Overlook, he is the ultimate passive subject. Chapter 15. Later that afternoon, the domestic veneer cracks further. Wendy and Danny return from a supply run to Sidewinder. They bring milk, Christmas presents, and a sense of fragile normalcy. Danny is excited about a model kit, a violent violet Volkswagen with a monster driver, a grotesque reflection of his father's own car, and perhaps his father's future self. Jack, playing the loving patriarch, presents Danny with a gift, the wasp nest. He has bug-bombed it, killing the inhabitants, or so he thinks. He offers it to his son as a trophy, a natural curiosity to keep in his room. Wendy is repulsed. Her instinct is sharp. She hates anything that stings. She recoils from the grey, papery sphere, sensing the danger her husband ignores. But Jack is confident. He assures her the wasps are dead. The poison has done its work. He recounts how he had a similar nest as a child, invoking a cycle of fathers passing dangerous things down to their sons. They stand in the yard, a family unit held together by love and denial. Jack has placed a dormant weapon of nature on his son's bedside table, convinced he has mastered it. It is the perfect metaphor for their situation, a beautiful, intricate shell brought into the home, concealing a dormant, venomous threat that is waiting for the warmth to wake it up. Chapter 16. The Overlook Hotel possesses a deceptive rhythm, a heartbeat that mimics normalcy just before it spikes into terror. We find Wendy listening to the sound of Jack's typewriter. To her, this mechanical clatter is the sound of redemption. Jack is writing a play, his productivity matching the early golden days of their marriage. He feels like he's finally barricading the door against his personal demons, believing that hard work is the lock that keeps the monsters out. But as we know in King's architecture of dread, when a character believes they are closing a door, the house is usually opening a trapdoor beneath their feet. Down the hall, 5-year-old Danny is engaged in a desperate struggle of his own. He isn't just learning to read, he is devouring literacy as a survival mechanism. He hunches over his Dick and Jane primers with the intensity of a bomb disposal expert. He senses that the written word holds power, perhaps the power to understand the cryptic messages Tony shows him. But there is a frantic energy here, a child pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion, sensing that time is running out. The domestic tranquility shatters in the bathroom. Wendy hears the water running, but Danny won't answer. The door is locked. When Jack arrives, his reaction is telling. The fuse of his temper, which he has been so carefully dampening, sparks instantly. He threatens to break the door, threatening physical discipline. The shadow of the bad thing, his past violence, loops over them. Jack kicks the lock, shattering the privacy of the bathroom, only to find Danny in a catatonic state. This isn't a normal childhood accident. Danny is perched on the tub, toothpaste frothing at his lips, staring into the mirror with dead eyes. He is a vessel, transmitting a signal from the hotel's dark heart. He speaks in a voice that is not his own, guttural and deep. He says, "Red rum." He says, "Roque." Jack shakes the boy, terrified and angry, yelling at him not to stutter. It's a moment of pure psychological horror. The father, terrified of his son's behavior, responds with aggression, the only language his own demons speak. When Danny snaps back to reality, he remembers nothing but the command of his invisible friend, Tony. Tony was in the mirror. Tony told him to lock the door. Later, the true insidiousness of the hotel's influence creeps in during a quiet moment between father and son. As Danny drifts off, he asks Jack about Roque. Jack freezes. This is the detail that pricks the skin. Roque is an obscure form of croquet, a game played with a mallet. There is no reason a 5-year-old should know this word. It is an anachronism, a piece of the hotel's history bleeding into the present. Jack dismisses red rum as nonsense, but Roque lodges in his mind like a splinter. He feels a rush of love for the boy, but it is tainted by a rising tide of paranoia. He needs a drink to dull the sharp edges of this impossibility. But the hotel is not done with them for the night. The supernatural element, previously psychological, now manifests physically. Danny wakes screaming. The wasp nest, the one Jack had killed with a bug bomb, the trophy resting in a bowl by Danny's bed, has resurrected. King uses the wasps as a potent symbol of the Overlook's refusal to die. Nature's rules do not apply here. Jack rushes in to find Danny being stung, the room buzzing with impossible life. In the chaos, Jack's reaction is manic, almost unhinged. He kills the insects again, but then he starts taking Polaroid photos of the boy's swollen hand, ranting about suing the bug bomb manufacturer. It's a pathetic attempt to apply the logic of the outside world, lawsuits, consumer rights, to a situation that is fundamentally spectral. He is trying to litigate a ghost. After calming the family, Jack examines the nest alone. It is crawling with life. The cold reality hits him. The bomb worked, yet they returned. He takes the nest outside to the freezing loading dock, locking it away. But as he stands in the biting wind, he feels the hotel watching him. The silence of the Overlook is heavy with threat. He realizes that the building itself is the enemy. It is a moment of clarity that will soon be buried under denial. But for now, Jack knows. The wasps were a warning. What is dead here does not stay dead. Chapter 17. We shift scenes to the sterile, fluorescent rationality of a doctor's office in Sidewinder. The terror of the night is replaced by the cold machinery of medical diagnosis. Dr. Edmonds is running an EEG on Danny, looking for epilepsy, for a biological flaw to explain the impossible. Danny, lying on the table, is smarter than the adults realize. He knows about epilepsy from a schoolmate. He understands the clinical language. But when the doctor probes about Tony, we get a glimpse into the mechanics of the shining. Danny tries to summon Tony to prove his existence, and instead of a friendly guide, he is plunged into a waking nightmare. This sequence is crucial because it differentiates Danny's power from mere imagination. He doesn't just see things, he is transported. In the doctor's office, he falls through a mental trapdoor back to the Overlook. He sees the inhuman place that makes human monsters. He sees a boiler that needs dumping. He sees a mallet swinging in the dark. The vision is violent and sensory, the smell of roasting dust, the sound of the Roki mallet smashing against silk wallpaper. He returns to the office sobbing, the memory dissolving like a dream upon waking, leaving only the residue of fear and the word redrum. Dr. Edmonds, however, is a man of science, not spirits. He delivers a diagnosis that is tragic in its plausibility. He tells Jack and Wendy that there is nothing physically wrong with Danny. He spins a narrative that fits all the available facts without touching the truth. He suggests that Danny is highly intelligent and stressed by the family's turmoil, the drinking, the move, the tension. He theorizes that Tony is a coping mechanism, a psychological crutch Danny created to deal with his parents' near divorce. The tragedy here is how desperately Jack and Wendy want to believe this lie. Edmund suggests that the terrifying nightmares are actually a good sign, that Danny is kicking the habit of his imaginary friend, flushing the fantasy out of his system. It's a seductive explanation. It absolves the parents of guilt, while promising a cure that requires no action other than patience. But notice the irony King weaves into the dialogue. Edmonds dismisses Danny's lucky guesses, like knowing where Jack's trunk was or predicting a trip to an amusement park, as mere coincidence or subconscious deduction. He explains away the magic with logic. Yet in the waiting room, Danny proves the doctor wrong again. He tells Edmonds that his mother is thinking about her dead sister, Aileen, who was killed by a car. When Edmonds checks this with Wendy, she confirms it. She had been thinking exactly that. The doctor waves this off as a good guess, but we know better. The shining is real. The diagnosis is wrong. The Torrance family leaves the clinic feeling relieved, armed with a medical explanation that acts as a shield against their fears. But it is a paper shield. They are walking back into the lion's den with a false sense of security, believing they are dealing with childhood stress when they are actually facing an ancient hungry entity. The chapter ends with a smile, but it is the most terrifying kind of smile. The smile of the oblivious victim stepping back onto the trapdoor. Chapter 18. The descent into the Overlook's basement is more than just a maintenance check. It is a descent into the subconscious of the hotel itself. Jack Torrance, wandering through the labyrinth of crates and rotting papers, isn't merely looking for rat poison or boiler schematics. He is hunting for secrets. And on the 1st of November, the hotel decides it is time to share them. While Wendy and Danny are out hiking, enjoying the deceptive peace of the autumn sun, Jack unearths a white leather scrapbook hidden atop a towering stack of invoices like a crown on a corpse. This isn't just a book, it's an artifact. Inside, the history of the Overlook unfolds not as a dry record, but as a glittering, bloody invitation. He finds a card for a masked ball, dated August 1945, the grand opening. Unmasking at midnight. The phrase triggers a literary memory in Jack. Pose the mask of the Red Death. It's a chilling foreshadowing. The hotel is a place of wealth and gaiety, but death is always the guest of honor. As Jack turns the pages, we see the true face of the Overlook. It's a history of corruption, masked as glamour. We learn of Horace Derwent, the shadowy millionaire who poured money into the hotel. Derwent is a classic king archetype, the ruthlessly successful man who builds empires on grey morals. He's an accountant with the soul of a pirate, involved in everything from munitions to bootlegging. The scrapbook reveals that the Overlook was never just a hotel. It was a playground for the elite to indulge their darkest vices. Jack becomes consumed by the narrative. He reads about the hotel's checkered ownership, bankruptcies, suicides, and mysterious key clubs that were fronts for the mafia. The clippings detail the presence of mobsters with colourful names like Baby Charlie and Vittorio the Chopper Ginelli. The glamour strips away to reveal blood on the walls, literally. One clipping details a triple gangland execution right outside the presidential suite. Here, the psychological manipulation of Jack Torrance shifts into high gear. Instead of being repulsed by this history of murder and vice, Jack is exhilarated. He feels a connection to it. He imagines writing a book about the Overlook, a massive work of history that will redeem his failed writing career. The hotel is seducing him through his own ambition. It offers him a story only he can tell, making him feel special, chosen. He finds a scribbled note in the book about someone having their genitals cut off, a brutal, vulgar detail that should horrify him, but instead it fascinates him. The spell is broken momentarily by Wendy. When she calls down to him, Jack flinches like a guilty child. He hurriedly hides the scrapbook. This is a crucial moment. He is now keeping secrets for the hotel. When Wendy approaches, she instinctively tries to smell alcohol on him. Jack isn't drinking, but he's intoxicated by the hotel's dark past. Her suspicion ignites his dry, drunk rage, that simmering resentment of her lack of trust. He deflects with forced humor and sexual innuendo, but the barrier is up. He leaves the basement, but a part of him remains with the scrapbook. He is beginning to understand that every great hotel has a ghost, and he is eager to meet them. Chapter 19. We shift perspective to Danny, and the psychological horror moves from adult obsession to primal childhood fear. Danny is alone, and despite Halloran's warnings, he finds himself drawn to room 217. This is the Bluebeard dynamic perfectly executed. Just as Bluebeard's wife was forbidden to open the one door that held the bloody secrets, Danny is pulled toward the thing he fears most. It's that morbid curiosity that compels us to look at a car crash or peer into the dark closet. Danny stands outside the grey door, the passkey heavy in his pocket. He remembers the story of Bluebeard, visualizing the severed heads of the wives. The hotel is whispering to him, testing his boundaries. He actually puts the key in the lock. The tension here is unbearable because we know, via The Shining, that there is something genuinely necrotic waiting inside. But Danny's innocence saves him, or perhaps his survival instinct. He withdraws the key without turning it. He chooses to obey the warning. However, the Overlook does not let guests leave unscathed. As Danny retreats, he has to pass the fire extinguisher, an old-fashioned model with a canvas hose curled on the wall. To a child's imagination, the hose is a snake. It's a dormant predator. This is Stephen King tapping into the universal fear of the inanimate coming to life. Danny rationalizes his fear, telling himself it's just a hose. But as he passes it, the heavy brass nozzle falls with a dull thud. The terror that follows is a masterclass in subjective reality. The hose doesn't physically chase him, but in Danny's mind, the threat is absolute. He imagines the hose is filled not with water, but with the wasps his father killed earlier, a callback to the physical threats the hotel has already manifested. He runs. He hears the dry, slithering sound of the canvas snake right at his heels, ready to strike. It is a panic-induced hallucination, but to Danny, it is real. When he reaches safety and looks back, the hose is lying still on the carpet, but the message has been delivered. You are not safe anywhere. Even the walls and the fixtures are watching you. Danny flees downstairs, the hotel's malice nipping at his heels. Chapter 20. If Chapter 18 was the seduction and Chapter 19 was the threat, Chapter 20 is the self-sabotage. Jack travels to the local library in Sidewinder to verify the stories from the scrapbook. He finds the evidence in old newspapers, confirming the mafia hits and the corrupt history. But the research comes with a physical price, a blinding, crushing headache. This isn't just eye strain. It's the physical manifestation of the hotel's grip on his mind, or perhaps the agony of his own cognitive dissonance. Wendy finds him, and once again, her presence irritates him. She offers him aspirin, but Jack dismisses it. He craves Excedrin, specifically the ritual of chewing the tablets, which gives him a bitter jolt reminiscent of a hangover cure. It's a dry drunk substitute for the burn of whiskey. Jack then makes a decision that defies all logic, driven by a mixture of arrogance and a subconscious desire to destroy his current situation. He goes to a payphone and calls Stuart Ullman, the hotel manager who hired him. This conversation is painful to witness. It is Jack Torrance at his most self-destructive. He chews Excedrin like candy, getting a chemical high, and proceeds to berate his boss. He taunts Ullman with the dirty history of the Overlook, the murders, the prostitution, the scandals. He accuses Ullman of hiding the truth. Ullman, naturally, is furious and threatens to fire him on the spot. Jack pushes him to the brink, screaming, "It's not your hotel," before slamming the phone down. Why does he do this? This is the core psychological insight of the chapter. Jack is terrified. Deep down, he senses the hotel is changing him, and part of him wants to be fired. If he loses the job, he has to leave the Overlook. He is trying to force the hand of fate because he lacks the strength to walk away on his own. He is blowing the whistle on himself, a behavior Wendy has noted in him before. He courts disaster to relieve the pressure of trying to be good. But there's a darker layer. By antagonizing Ullman, Jack is also severing his ties to the outside world. He is aligning himself with the hotel against the management. He frames himself as the defender of the Overlook's true history. When he hangs up, the adrenaline fades, replaced by the cold reality that he may have just doomed his family to financial ruin. Or worse, trapped them in the mountains with no way out. He meets Wendy and Danny outside, the snow beginning to fall heavily. The trap is snapping shut. Jack puts his arm around his family, calling the truck home. But as they drive back up the winding roads, Jack realizes a chilling truth. He doesn't like the Overlook, but he is becoming part of it. The snow closes in, sealing the exits, and the Torrance family heads back to the place that is slowly digesting them. Chapter 21. The quarters of the Torrance family were silent, but it was a heavy, counterfeit silence. It was 10 o'clock, and while the lights were out, sleep was a stranger to Jack Torrance. He lay awake, listening to the rhythm of his wife's breathing, tasting the ghostly residue of dissolved aspirin on his tongue, a bitter substitute for the alcohol his body still craved. Earlier that evening, the outside world had reached in to tighten the screws. Al Shockley, Jack's friend, and the man who secured him this job had called. It wasn't a social call, it was a warning shot. The conversation had been an exercise in humiliation. Al had received a frantic call from Stuart Ullman, the hotel manager, claiming Jack was digging up the Overlook's dirty laundry. Jack, in a moment of hubris, had teased Ullman about the hotel's scandalous history, the dark secrets buried in the basement scrapbooks. But Al Shockley wasn't laughing. He delivered an ultimatum that struck at the core of Jack's pride. Jack had dreams of writing a great non-fiction book about the Overlook, a book that would expose its sordid past and re-establish his career. Al crushed that dream in a single sentence. He forbade Jack from writing the book. He forbade him from harassing Ullman. If Jack wanted to keep his job, his last chance at redemption, he had to agree to be silenced. This is a pivotal moment in the psychology of Jack Torrance. He is a man driven by ego and resentment. When Al reminded him of the favors done, of the tenure almost saved, of the alcoholism covered up, Jack didn't feel gratitude. He felt a burning, acidic rage. He felt like a charity case. The text tells us that Jack wanted to scream, to reject the charity. But the reality of his situation, the disintegration of his life, the old VW with the bad fuel pump, the fear of becoming destitute, forced him to swallow his pride. He agreed to Al's terms. No book, no calls. He surrendered his artistic freedom to keep the lights on, but the cost was high. As he hung up the phone, physical pain racked him, stomach cramps that doubled him over, a somatic manifestation of his swallowed rage. Now, lying in the dark, Jack felt the humiliation burning him. He imagined a future reckoning, a time when he would write the book anyway and expose them all. But for now, he was trapped. Wendy, lying beside him, was equally awake. She could sense the change in her husband. The old mannerisms were returning, the nervous wiping of the lips, the chewing of Excedrin, the snapping fingers. These were the ghosts of his drinking days, symptoms of a dry drunk. She realized with a sinking heart that while the alcohol was gone, the behavior was back. She also sensed a disconnection in Danny. Earlier, the boy had known Al was on the phone and knew Al was angry, things he couldn't possibly have heard. Wendy resolved that tomorrow she would finally talk to her son about his shine, though she didn't call it that yet. She needed to bridge the widening gap between them before the snow closed in. Danny, in his own room, lay clutching his battered teddy bear. He was the sentinel, the only one truly seeing the darkness gathering. He was terrified of the men in white coats. He knew his father was unraveling, just like a friend's father who had been taken away to a sanitarium. Danny kept his visions, the blood, the fire hose snake, secret because he feared that speaking of them would lead to his family being destroyed or him being institutionalized. He realized with the heavy burden of a child who knows too much that his silence was the price of their unity. He tried to understand the word that haunted him, redrum, but the answer remained just out of reach. Chapter 22. The next day, the Torrance family drove down the winding roads to Sidewinder. The radio played Creedence Clearwater Revival's Bad Moon Rising, a sonic foreshadowing of the doom waiting in the high country. The weather report promised a massive storm, a blizzard that would seal the passes. In the truck, a critical negotiation took place between mother and son. Wendy, sensing the danger, offered Danny an out. She asked if he wanted to leave the Overlook to go stay with her mother. It was a lifeline. But Danny, possessing a terrifying emotional maturity, looked at the situation through his father's eyes. He saw Jack's desperation. He understood that leaving now would break his father, confirming Jack's failure as a provider. Danny knew that Jack loved them, but his love was entangled with a fear of inadequacy. If they left, the family would shatter. Here we see the tragedy of the parentified child. Danny sacrifices his own safety for his father's ego. He lies to his mother. He tells her he wants to stay. He even lies about Jack's drinking, assuring Wendy that Daddy hasn't broken his sobriety, protecting her from the truth he senses. When Wendy asked him to consult his invisible friend Tony, Danny admitted Tony hadn't come. He broke down in tears, the pressure of his double life crushing him. Wendy, mistaking his tears for fear of separation, comforted him. They agreed to stay. They chose to remain in the trap, believing it was the only way to save the family. Chapter 23. Back at the hotel, the air was crisp and cold. Jack went out to trim the topiary animals, the hedge lion, the rabbit, the buffalo, and the dog. He wielded the hedge clippers with a sense of cynical detachment, thinking about how he would cut them all down if he owned the place. He wandered down to the playground, a desolate island of childhood in the shadow of the massive hotel. He sat on the slide, feeling too large, too old, and too tired. He looked up at the hotel, and for a moment, the silence was absolute. Then, the hair on his neck stood up. A primal alarm bell rang in his lizard brain. He was being watched. Jack turned to look at the hedge animals he had just trimmed. At first glance, they were the same. But the mind has a way of rejecting the impossible, and Jack tried to rationalize what he was seeing. The rabbit, which he had trimmed standing on its hind legs, was now on all fours. The psychological horror here is executed with a game of red light, green light. Jack looked away, and when he looked back, the animals had moved. The lion was closer to the path. The dog was crouching, preparing to spring. These were not hallucinations of a drunkard. These were solid, physical shifts. The Overlook was flexing its muscles, testing the boundaries of Jack's reality. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He watched them, unblinking, terrified that if he closed his eyes, they would rush him. The dog's leafy mouth seemed to snarl. The buffalo lowered its head to charge. Jack was paralyzed, his mind screaming against the violation of natural law. Eventually, the spell broke. He forced himself to move, to retrieve his clippers, to light a cigarette with trembling hands. He retreated to the hotel, and by the time he reached the safety of the indoors, the denial mechanism had slammed into place. He told himself it was stress. It was the play he was writing. It was the wasps. It was anything but the truth. He buried the terror deep, adding another layer of repression to his already pressurized psyche. He told no one. Chapter 24. Dusk brought the snow. It wasn't a flurry. It was a curtain falling on the world. The storm began to howl, burying the road, the playground, and the terrifying hedge animals under a blanket of white. Standing on the porch, the three Torrances watched the world disappear. There was a strange collective sense of relief. The decision to stay or go had been taken out of their hands. The bridge was burned. They were committed to the Overlook now, isolated in a sea of white. They went inside, locking the doors against the wind, unaware that they had just sealed themselves inside the digestive tract of a monster. The hotel had them exactly where it wanted them. Chapter 25. Time jumped forward. A week and a half of isolation had passed. The snow lay deep and heavy, drifting up to the first-floor windows. The family had settled into a routine of survival, sledding, furnace checks, and silence. Jack became obsessed with the hotel's history. In the basement, among the cobwebs and the roar of the boiler, he found a scrapbook. It was a chaotic archive of the Overlook's dark past. Suicides, illicit affairs, murders. He found a piece of bloody sheeting, a slashed teddy bear, disjointed notes about things moving under the rugs. This is the intellectual seduction of Jack Torrance. The hotel appeals to his writer's curiosity, drawing him in with secrets, making him feel like an insider, a historian of the macabre. He feels a kinship with the hotel, even as it drives him mad. Meanwhile, Danny stood outside room 217. He had a passkey. He knew he shouldn't go in. The chef, Dick Halloran, had warned him. But curiosity is a powerful force, and the shine pulled him like a magnet. He needed to know if the things he saw were real or just pictures, as Mr. Halloran had promised. He needed to prove to himself that the fire hose snake and the blood were just phantoms. He entered the room. It was cold and dark. He moved to the bathroom, the heart of the darkness he had sensed. The door was ajar. He pushed it open. The shower curtain was drawn. Danny stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached out and pulled the curtain back. There, in the tub, lay a woman. She had been dead a long time. She was bloated, her skin a mottled purple, her body filled with the gases of decay. She stared at him with fish-dead eyes, grinning a rictus grin. Terror froze Danny in place. He couldn't scream. The sound died in his throat. Then, the impossible happened. The dead woman sat up. The sound of cracking ice filled the bathroom as she rose, her dead joints popping. She fixed her gaze on the boy. Danny stumbled back, bladder releasing in sheer shock, but he was trapped. The door he had entered through would not open. He was locked in with the corpse. He tried to use the mental shield Halloran had given him. "It's just a picture," he screamed internally. "It can't hurt me. It's not real." He squeezed his eyes shut, willing the monster away, praying that when he opened them the tub would be empty. He stood there, trembling, waiting for the delusion to fade. But the Overlook is not a picture book. It is a place where the past has teeth. Danny felt the cold, wet sensation of bloated hands closing softly around his throat. He was spun around, forced to look into the dead, purple face of the woman from the tub. The mantra had failed. The picture had hands, and they were squeezing the life out of him. Chapter 26. The silence of the Overlook is heavy, a physical weight that presses down on the soul. In the manager's quarters, Danny Torrance succumbs to it, the rhythm of her knitting needles slowing until she drifts into a dreamless, exhausted sleep. But for Jack, sleep offers no sanctuary. It is a trapdoor. Dozing over a pile of mundane hotel invoices, Jack slips into a nightmare that is less a dream and more a vivisection of his own trauma. The Overlook, sensing the cracks in his psyche, pries them open. He isn't in the hotel anymore. He's back in the shadow of his father, Mark Torrance, a man of hospital whites and violent drunken rages. King masterfully parallels Jack's current deterioration with his father's past, showing us that the rot in the Torrance family tree runs deep. Jack dreams of the elevator game, a memory that should be playful, but is tainted with the terror of his father's unpredictable strength. It's a memory of love curdling into fear, of being thrown too high, of the smell of stale beer and potential violence. The nightmare shifts, dissolving into a surreal horror where the hotel's CB radio becomes a mouthpiece for the dead. His father's voice cuts through the static, not with wisdom, but with a screeching, petulant demand for blood. The entity wearing his father's voice urges Jack to cane Danny, to kill the family because they are conspiring against his greatness. This is the Overlook's primary weapon. It validates Jack's narcissism while feeding his paranoia. It tells him that his violence is actually artistic integrity. Jack wakes screaming, the line between nightmare and reality shattered. In a frenzy of rejection, rejecting the voice, rejecting the truth of his own dark impulses, he smashes the CB radio. It's a catastrophic mistake. He thinks he is silencing the ghost, but in reality, he has just destroyed their last lifeline to the outside world. He stands amidst the wreckage, a man with a migraine hammering behind his eyes, convinced he has exorcised a demon when he has actually just locked the asylum doors from the inside. Chapter 27. The echo of the smashed radio brings Danny running, but the horror has only just begun. She finds Jack broken, weeping, a man terrified by his own mind. He confesses the dream, the voice of his father, and the destruction of the radio. For a moment, he is vulnerable, a frightened child trapped in a man's body. But the sympathy evaporates the moment they ascend the stairs. Here the narrative twists the knife. They find Danny standing at the top of the stairs, catatonic. He is sucking his thumb, eyes staring into the void, with dark bruises forming on his neck. The sight triggers a fatal psychological reaction in Danny. She doesn't see a supernatural attack. She sees a pattern. She sees the husband who once broke their son's arm in a drunken rage. The evidence is circumstantial but damning, and Danny's trust in Jack snaps instantly. She accuses him of choking Danny in his sleep, of being the monster he promised he'd never be again. This accusation is the catalyst Jack's sanity didn't need. He is innocent of this specific crime, but his past guilt makes him defenseless. Danny snatches the boy away, hissing threats, transforming from a wife into a cornered lioness. She barricades herself and Danny in the bedroom, locking Jack out. The click of that lock is more than a physical barrier. It represents the total disintegration of the family unit. Jack is left alone in the hallway, paralyzed by the injustice of it. He screams his innocence into the empty hotel, but the Overlook absorbs his rage, storing it for later. He is isolated, accused, and seething, the perfect vessel for the hotel's influence. Chapter 28. Danny sits in the locked bedroom, paralyzed by a terrifying calculus. How dangerous is her husband. She realizes with cold pragmatism that she might have to kill him to save her son. The tragedy here is the lack of information. She is reacting to a ghost's violence by blaming the recovering alcoholic. Forced by necessity, she decides she must eventually face Jack to get Danny to a doctor. Meanwhile, Jack seeks refuge in the one place that has always understood him, the bar. He wanders into the Colorado lounge, now a dark cavern of memory. The tables are covered in plastic, shrouds for the dead social life of the hotel. He steps into the shadows, and the Overlook rewards his despair with a seduction. He smells it first, the yeasty, damp scent of stale beer. He sits at the empty bar, his knuckles white, and the hotel constructs a hallucination so vivid it overrides reality. Jack begins a conversation with Lloyd, the phantom bartender. It's a chilling scene because Jack is fully aware the shelves are empty, yet he orders imaginary martinis, paying with the currency of his soul. He rants to the empty room about the wagon, his sobriety. He doesn't describe it as a salvation, but as a torture device, a church for women and a prison for men. This is the raw, ugly truth of the dry drunk. He hates his sobriety. He craves the oblivion. He tosses back the invisible drinks, getting drunk on the placebo effect of his own madness. The hallucination shatters abruptly when Wendy enters with Danny. The boy is no longer catatonic. He is terrified. He breaks from his mother and rushes, not away from Jack, but to him. Danny clings to his father, screaming, "It was her! It was her!" The twist hits Jack with the force of a physical blow. The accusation shifts from him to an external force. He looks at Wendy, his silver eyes cold and triumphant. He isn't relieved that his son is safe. He is vindicated that his wife was wrong. "Wendy," he purrs, weaponizing her mistake. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, sealing the hotel in a white tomb. Chapter 29. The family retreats to the kitchen, an island of light in the gathering dark. Jack, feeling the surge of authority that comes with vindication, concocts a sedative for Danny, warm milk, sugar, and sherry. It's a grim irony that the alcoholic father is dosing his son with alcohol to calm him, a subtle nod to the cycle of dependency. Danny, calming down, finally breaks the silence he's held since their arrival. He confesses everything. He explains the shine, the telepathic link he shares with Halloran, and the visions he's been plagued with, the blood, the red rum, the history of the hotel. This is the moment the narrative shifts from psychological thriller to undeniable supernatural horror. Danny reveals that he disobeyed the warnings and entered room 217. His description is visceral and repulsive. He talks of the dead woman in the tub, bloated and purple, lying in wait. She tried to strangle him, her mind a wasp's nest of mindless malice. This confirms what Jack has refused to see. The hotel isn't just haunted, it is predatory. Jack listens, his face a mask. He decides he must go up to room 217. Wendy begs him not to, terrified of leaving him alone or losing him to the house, but Jack insists. He claims it's his duty as the caretaker, but there's a darker undercurrent. He is drawn to the horror. He needs to see it. He leaves his weeping wife and terrified son, stepping out of the domestic circle and back into the maw of the Overlook. Danny tries to comfort his mother, saying the hotel can't hurt Jack because he doesn't shine, but Wendy knows better. The hotel doesn't need to shine to break a man. It just needs to find his cracks. Chapter 30. Jack bypasses the elevator, that open mouth of brass and wire, and takes the stairs, chewing Excedrin like candy to fight the crushing pressure in his skull. He approaches room 217 with a mix of arrogance and dread. He is the modern man, the rational skeptic, coming to disprove a child's nightmare. He enters the room. It appears normal, sterile. But as he steps into the bathroom, the atmosphere changes. The air is thick, necrotic. He checks the tub. It is empty. For a split second, relief washes over him, fueling his anger at Danny for the lie. But then, the details betray him. There is a bath mat on the floor. It shouldn't be there. And the smell. Not the dust of an empty hotel, but the faint, cloying scent of Lawila soap. Lavender and decay. Jack tries to retreat, to cling to his denial, but the Overlook will not let him go so easily. Behind him, the shower curtain rings rattle. Ch-ch-ch, a sound of dry bones sliding on metal. He freezes. He knows with the absolute certainty of the damned that the tub is no longer empty. The curtain is drawn, hiding a bloated, grinning horror. Terror, primal and overwhelming, seizes him. He does not pull the curtain back. He is not the hero of this story. He turns and flees, his movements jerky and puppet-like. He scrambles into the hall, locking the door behind him, his breath coming in jagged gasps. And then, the final stroke of horror. As he stands in the hallway, pressing the passkey into his pocket, he hears the doorknob of 217 turn. From the inside, something is trying to get out. Something wants to meet him. He backs away, eyes wide, mind fracturing. He notices the fire extinguisher in the hall has changed position, the nozzle now pointing at him like a accusatory finger. The hotel is shifting around him, fluid and alive. He descends the stairs, leaving the thing in 217 behind, but carrying the knowledge of it like a cancer in his gut. Chapter 31. Jack returns to the kitchen where Wendy and Danny wait in agonizing suspense. He stands before them, the passkey jingling in his hand, a sound of false normalcy. He looks at his family, their faces pale with fear, looking to him for salvation or at least truth. And Jack Torrance lies. Nothing there, he says. Not a thing. He smiles a reassuring, lying smile. With those words, Jack seals their fate. He denies the reality of the danger, validating the hotel's existence while stripping his family of their defenses. It is the ultimate betrayal. He has seen the monster, heard it, smelled it, and now he chooses to protect it rather than his wife and son. He bounces the key in his hand, feeling a desperate, burning thirst for a drink, while the Overlook settles around them, satisfied. The trap is sprung. The protector has become the accomplice. Chapter 32. The atmosphere in the Torrance bedroom had curdled, thickening with the unspoken tension that filled the entire Overlook Hotel. It was late afternoon, and Jack had dragged a cot into the master bedroom, a physical admission that the family unit was circling the wagons. Danny, exhausted by the psychic assault of the previous days, had collapsed into a heavy slumber, leaving his parents to navigate the minefield of their own anxieties. Jack sat at his desk, staring at his play, The Little School. It was dead on the page. The dialogue felt wooden, the themes puerile. He realized with a sinking heart that he had begun to despise his protagonist, Gary Benson, a character he initially conceived as a hero, but now viewed as a manipulative little monster. It's a telling psychological projection. As Jack's sympathy for his own son erodes under the hotel's influence, his ability to write a sympathetic young character evaporates. He now found himself rooting for the antagonist, Denker, the sadistic headmaster. The Overlook was already rewriting Jack's morality, turning him from a man who despised authority into one who craved the absolute power of the disciplinarian. Wendy interrupted his brooding. The conversation that followed was a desperate dance of denial and fear. She wanted out. She saw the bruises on Danny's neck, the physical evidence of the hotel's malice. She pleaded for them to take the snowmobile down the mountain. Jack, however, countered with a lethal mix of pragmatism and gaslighting. He argued that the snowmobile might not work, that the weather was too dangerous, that they could die trying to leave. But beneath his logic lay a darker truth. He didn't want to leave. His failure in the outside world was too raw. The hotel offered him a perverse sort of sanctuary. To soothe Wendy, Jack deployed a sophisticated intellectual smokescreen. He suggested that Danny's bruises weren't from a ghost, but were stigmata, psychosomatic wounds manifested by Danny's own high-strung subconscious. It's a brilliant, terrifying rationalization. Jack used his knowledge of psychology not to help his son, but to explain away the supernatural threat, thereby justifying their continued stay. He argued that Danny's shine was just a hysterical disorder, turning the victim into the source of the problem. He spun a web of words until Wendy, desperate for comfort, allowed herself to be seduced. They made love, a desperate physical act to blot out the encroaching darkness, but even in intimacy, Jack's mind was elsewhere, calculating, drifting. Sleep brought no relief, only a plunge into the hotel's toxicity. Jack found himself sleepwalking in his dreams, standing once again in the bathroom of room 217. But this time the horror was specific to his past. The corpse in the tub wasn't the woman. It was George Hatfield, the stuttering prep school student Jack had beaten. The incident that cost him his teaching career. In the nightmare, the guilt and the hotel's malice fused. George rose from the water, accusing Jack not just of violence but of rigging the timer, a reference to the boiler, the beating heart of the hotel. The dream logic shifted rapidly, violently. Jack fled into the basement, searching for the boiler's timer, screaming that he would find it. But the dream warped again. He held a weapon, not a timer, but a cane that morphed into a roquet mallet. Here, the subconscious veil was ripped away. Jack began to beat the figure of George Hatfield, raining down blows with the mallet, seeking to destroy the source of his humiliation. But as the figure on the floor looked up, the face changed. It wasn't George. It was Danny. In the safety of the dream, Jack did what he could not yet do in reality. He brought the mallet down between his son's eyes, extinguishing the light. He woke up screaming a silent "no," sweating and trembling in the dark. It was a premonition of the tragedy to come, a signal that his paternal instinct was being cannibalized by a murderous urge he could barely repress. Chapter 33. The next morning the sun rose on a world of blinding white purity, a stark contrast to the rot spreading inside Jack's mind. He made his way to the equipment shed, ostensibly to check the snowmobile as he had promised Wendy. The shed was a museum of summer leisure, croquet sets, lawnmowers, now frozen in time. Jack found a roquet mallet, hefting it, feeling the seductive weight of the weapon he had wielded in his nightmare. It felt right in his hand, a tool of finesse and power, a schizophrenia of design that mirrored his own fracturing psyche. He turned his attention to the snowmobile. It sat there like a giant yellow predatory wasp, a symbol of the noisy, mechanical modern world Jack despised. He hated the machine, yet he began the work of reviving it. He checked the fuel, found the spark plugs, and hunted for the battery. For a moment he couldn't find it, and a wave of dark relief washed over him. If the machine was broken, the decision was made for him. They would have to stay. He could tell Wendy he tried, acting the part of the defeated hero while secretly rejoicing in their entrapment. But then, the malicious serendipity of the Overlook struck. He found the battery. The path to salvation was open. And that is when the psychological dam broke. Kneeling in the cold shed, Jack watched Danny playing outside in the snow. Suddenly, the chaotic elements of his life, the guilt, the alcoholism, the failures, the ghosts, snapped into a singular, terrifying focus. He remembered a childhood moment in catechism class, staring at a jumble of black and white dots, until suddenly, Gestalt style, they formed the face of Jesus. Once seen, the face could never be unseen. Now, looking at the hotel and his son, the pattern revealed itself. The Overlook wasn't just a haunted building. It was a gathering of forces, and it wanted Danny. It wanted that bright, shining energy. But more devastatingly, Jack realized the hotel was working on him too. He was the weak link. He was the weapon the hotel would use to harvest the boy. The realization should have sent him fleeing down the mountain. Instead, it paralyzed him with a fatalistic acceptance. He hooked up the battery. The engine was ready to roar. He had the power to save his family right there in his grease-stained hands. But the pull of the place was too strong. The desire to be absorbed into the hotel's history, to become its chronicler, its Boswell, overwhelmed his love for his family. In a moment of quiet, deliberate madness, Jack leaned into the engine compartment and removed the magneto, the heart of the ignition system. He didn't just hide it. He opened the back door of the shed and hurled the magneto into the deep snow, watching it disappear into the white oblivion. It was an act of murder by omission. He had severed their lifeline. As he stood there, breathing the thin, cold air, a terrible peace settled over him. The decision was made. There was no going back. He lied to himself that it was fate, but it was choice. He walked back out into the snow to play with his son, a Judas with a smile, ready to tell his wife that they were trapped. Chapter 34. Time compressed. November bled away, and Thanksgiving passed in a surreal lull. The family ate turkey and tried to pretend normalcy, but the silence of the snowbound hotel was deafening. Danny, however, had learned a survival strategy: constant vigilance. He stayed in the safe places, navigating the hotel like a soldier behind enemy lines. But the urge to be a child, to play, drew him outside into the biting cold. Danny strapped on his snowshoes and headed for the playground. The topiary animals, the lions, the dog, the rabbit, were buried under snowdrifts, looking like harmless white humps. He felt a false sense of security. He made his way to the concrete rings of the playground, tunneling into one like a burrowing animal. Inside, the light was dim, the air dead and cold. Panic struck him with the force of a physical blow. Claustrophobia wrapped its hands around his throat. In the darkness of the concrete tube, the shining flared up. He sensed he was not alone. The tube wasn't just a piece of playground equipment. It was a grave. He felt a presence sharing the dark space with him, something small and dead that wanted to play forever. The fear of being buried alive, of being trapped in the dark with a corpse, sent him scrambling backward, clawing at the snow to escape the concrete throat of the tunnel. He burst out into the blinding sunlight, gasping for air, thinking he was safe. But the Overlook does not play by the rules of sanctuary. He heard a soft thump behind him, the sound of heavy snow falling to the ground. Danny turned. The hedge dog had shed its snow cover. It was sitting up. He tried to rationalize it the way his father would. The sun melted the snow. Gravity did the rest. But then he looked away, and when he looked back, the dog was closer. This is the ultimate nightmare of childhood. The game of red light, green light played with monsters. The laws of physics had been suspended. The inanimate was hunting him. The hedge animals moved only when unobserved, existing in a quantum state of malice. Danny began to retreat, his snowshoes clumsy on his feet. He tried to keep his eyes on the animals, but he had to look where he was going. Every time he turned his head, the snow crunched. Thump, thump. He looked back. The lions were free of the snow now. They were bunching together, a pride on the hunt, their leafy flanks trembling with the anticipation of the kill. They were herding him, cutting off his escape routes. The terror was absolute. This wasn't a hallucination of a spirit. This was the physical world turning against him. He stumbled, his snowshoes tangling, reducing him to a crawling, desperate panic. He scrambled toward the porch, his breath tearing at his lungs. The lions were right behind him, effectively breathing down his neck. He could hear the rustle of their dry, twiggy muscles, the creak of their branches. He threw himself onto the porch just as the air behind him whistled with the violence of a swipe. Pain flared in his leg. He screamed, not with his voice, but with his soul. Jack and Wendy burst out of the doors, finding him sobbing on the planks. His snow pants were ripped. Blood trickled from a scratch on his calf. It was a shallow wound, but its implication was deep. The stigmata theory was dead. Ghosts might be in the mind, but hedge lions had claws that could draw real blood. Danny collapsed in his father's arms, traumatized, while in the distance the hedge animals sat frozen once more, innocent sculptures of green, waiting for the next time the boy looked away. Chapter 35. The psychological disintegration of the Torrance family accelerates rapidly in the lobby. Danny, traumatized and shivering, recounts the impossible. The topiary animals, the lion, the rabbit, didn't just stand there. They moved. They hunted him. But here is where the horror of the supernatural crashes against the horror of human denial. Jack, warming himself by the fire, refuses to validate his son's reality. To admit the hedges moved is to admit the Overlook is alive, and Jack's fragile sanity cannot withstand that truth yet. Instead, Jack drags Danny to the window, forcing a confrontation with the snow-covered lawn. There are no tracks, save for Danny's. This is classic gaslighting, though perhaps driven by Jack's own desperate need for rationality rather than pure malice. He interrogates the boy, demanding a logical explanation for the scratches on Danny's leg. When logic fails, violence takes its place. The tension snaps, and Jack strikes Danny across the face. It's a pivotal, shattering moment. The father who promised never to hurt his son again has broken that vow, driven by the hotel's insidious influence. The mask of the loving father slips, revealing the beaten old man Wendy fears he is becoming. Jack retreats into guilt and afternoon drinking, while Wendy is left with a chilling realization. The haunting isn't over. It has barely begun. The family is fractured, and the hotel begins to seep into the cracks. Chapter 36. The terror shifts from the psychological to the mechanical. In the dead of night, the silence is broken by the rhythmic, metallic humming of the elevator. Remember, the hotel is shut down for winter. There is no electricity to the lift, yet it moves. This scene masterfully builds dread through sound. The clank, the whir, the thump, echoing the heartbeat of the waking monster. Jack, Wendy, and Danny investigate. Jack, clinging to the last shreds of his skepticism, insists it's a short circuit. He is the rational patriarch, the protector, even as he stands in his bathrobe looking like a tragic, unraveled figure. But the Overlook doesn't deal in short circuits. It deals in memories. As the elevator descends and rises, Wendy and Danny are bombarded by psychic residue, phantom music, the scent of a long-dead party, the sensation of a crowded masquerade. When Jack finally forces the elevator door open, the car is empty, seemingly vindicating him. But King doesn't let them off the hook. Wendy spots the evidence on the floor, fresh confetti and a black silk cat's eye mask. This is a crucial, tangible link between the spectral world and physical reality. It proves the short-circuit theory is a lie. The hotel isn't just projecting hallucinations, it is physically manifesting its past. Jack refuses to acknowledge the mask, staring blindly, retreating further into a dangerous denial that will eventually cost him his soul. Chapter 37. December arrives and Danny explores the ballroom, a place of frozen grandeur. We see Danny's survival mechanism here. He categorizes the hotel into safe and unsafe zones. He believes the ballroom is safe, but he is tragically mistaken. He finds a clock under a glass dome, a symbol of the hotel's suspended time. In a moment of childish curiosity that feels like sealing a pact, Danny uses a silver key to wind the clock. This act is symbolic of winding up the heart of the Overlook. The mechanism comes alive, revealing a grotesque tableau of ballet dancers who engage in lewd, mechanical acts. It's a perversion of innocence, a reflection of the hotel's decadent and corrupt history. The atmosphere shifts violently. The room feels populated by the ghosts of the eternal party. Danny realizes that in the Overlook, time is not linear. All tragedies, the 1945 party, the mob executions, the suicide in room 217, are happening simultaneously, forever. Then, the vision strikes. Danny is plunged into a psychic nightmare. He sees the future. A figure in the hallway, a roque mallet burying itself in the wall, and the terrifying reflected word, Redrum. It spells murder in the mirror. He sees his father's destruction and the hotel's ultimate endgame. The terror is too much for a 5-year-old mind to contain. He screams into the void, projecting a telepathic distress signal of immense power. He calls out to the only safety line he has left, Dick Halloran. It is a scream that transcends space, a desperate plea from the throat of a child facing absolute evil. Chapter 38. The narrative snaps thousands of miles away to Florida, providing a jarring tonal contrast. Dick Halloran is immersed in the warmth, the smell of oranges, and the mundane rhythm of life. He's buying vegetables, joking with friends, and driving his limousine. This grounding in reality makes the intrusion of the supernatural even more violent. Danny's psychic scream hits Halloran like a physical bullet. It's not just a voice. It's a sensory assault that nearly causes him to crash his car. King establishes the sheer power of the shine here. It connects them across the continent, binding their fates. Halloran knows instantly that the boy is in mortal danger. The imagery of the shine acting as a searchlight is potent. They are two lighthouses signaling in the dark. Halloran drops everything. He lies to his boss about a sick son to get time off. A lie that is emotionally true, as Danny has become a spiritual son to him. The urgency is palpable as he races against time, booking a flight to Denver. However, the friction of the real world intervenes. He gets stopped for speeding, a mundane obstacle that ratchets up the suspense. He misses his flight by mere minutes. The chapter ends with Halloran stranded at the airport, the smell of oranges turning cloying and sickly, as another psychic scream from Danny rips through his mind. The rescue mission has begun, but the Overlook is already winning the race against time. Chapter 39. The descent into madness isn't a slide, it's a staircase, and Danny Torrance finds her son sitting halfway down it, suspended between the safety of the lobby and the darkness of the floors above. Danny is tossing a red rubber ball, the rhythmic thwack-snap of the rubber against his palm keeping time to a low, tuneless song from an old Eddie Cochran album. But the nostalgia of rock and roll has curdled here. When Wendy sits beside him, the horror is immediate and visceral. Danny's lip is swollen, bloated with blood, a grotesque testament to violence. The tragedy here isn't just the injury, it's the resignation. When Wendy asks what happened, her mind instantly leaps to Jack. It's the battered wife's reflex, the anticipation of the backhand, the inevitable return to the cycle of abuse. But Danny shakes his head. It wasn't Daddy. Not physically. It was Tony, or rather the absence of him. The boy explains with a chilling, flat affect that Tony is licked. The imaginary friend, that subconscious projection of Danny's own survival instinct, has been barred from the premises. The hotel has put up a no trespassing sign in the boy's own mind. Danny reveals the terrifying truth. The hotel is fully awake. It's no longer just empty rooms and dust. It's a hive. He describes the sound of them, the guests, the memories, the hungry dead, sighing like the wind in the attic and the basement. This is the heavy psychological weight of the Overlook. It doesn't just haunt you. It displaces you. Danny admits he can hear them, and worse, he knows what they want. They want Jack, but only as a tool. The prize is Danny. The boy possesses the battery power this necrotic machinery needs to run forever. Wendy tries to comfort him, but the isolation is absolute. Danny reveals he has been screaming telepathically for Dick Halloran, casting his mind out like a desperate radio signal into the snow-choked night. But the distance is too great, or the static of the hotel is too loud. He tells her Jack is in the basement and he won't be coming up tonight. Wendy, driven by a primal maternal instinct that overrides her terror, leaves him for a moment to retrieve a butcher knife from the kitchen. It is the transition from victim to protector. Danny sits alone, and the auditory hallucinations begin. The voice in his head is no longer his own, nor Tony's. It is the hotel itself, mocking him with nursery rhymes twisted into obscenities. Try it. You'll like it. The Overlook is a fun house where the mirrors show you your own death. To Danny, the sound of the waking hotel is like the hum of wasps in a ground nest, a drowsy, lethal buzzing that signifies the swarm is coming. Chapter 40. In the bowels of the hotel, the physical heart of the beast is threatening to arrest. Jack Torrance is in the basement, hunched over the scrapbook of the hotel's sordid history, drunk on the past rather than alcohol. He has become an archaeologist of his own doom, so obsessed with the scandalous history of the Overlook that he has forgotten his one true responsibility, the boiler. The realization hits him with the force of a physical blow. The pressure gauge is climbing past the red line, the needle trembling at 210 pounds per square inch. The old iron beast is groaning, rivets popping, ready to blow the Overlook off the map. And here King gives us a glimpse into the suicidal ideation of the addict. A voice whispers to Jack, "Let it go." It's a seductive thought. If the boiler explodes, it's all over. No more failure, no more struggle, no more writer's block. Just a flash of orange-violet fire, and then the peace of non-existence. He fantasizes about the shrapnel tearing through the building, a cleansing fire that would erase the hotel and his family in one stroke. It calls back to a memory of his father burning a wasp nest with gasoline, the belief that fire purges all sins. But the survival instinct, or perhaps the hotel's intervention, kicks in. Jack frantically turns the dump valve. The steam screams like a dying dragon, scalding his hands, blistering his skin. He wrestles the beast back from the brink, the pressure dropping, the catastrophe averted. But in the aftermath, the adrenaline crash leaves him hollow. He stands there shaking, his hands throbbing like rotten teeth, and the craving hits him. The need for a drink is no longer a desire. It is a physiological command. He convinces himself that he has saved the hotel, and therefore the hotel owes him. This is the twisted transactional logic of the possessed. He deserves a reward, an anesthetic. He ascends the stairs, leaving the basement behind, walking with the quick, eager steps of a man marching toward his own execution, believing it to be a celebration. Chapter 41. Morning brings no relief, only a shift in the quality of the nightmare. Danny wakes from a dream of fire to a reality that is freezing cold. He senses his father's mind, but it's a cesspool of cravings. Jack is broadcasting his thirst, a mental shout for gin, bourbon, anything to drown the consciousness. Danny recoils, realizing that the voice in his father's head is a mimic, a dark ventriloquist act performed by the hotel. Driven by fear, Danny steps into the hallway and encounters the grotesque manifestation of the Overlook's decadence. It is the dogman, a man in a tuxedo with a dog's head, crawling on all fours, smeared with blood and champagne. This is Roger, a ghost from the hotel's masquerade past, a man who debased himself for the favor of his lover, Harry Derwent. The encounter is profoundly sexual and deeply disturbing, a manifestation of submission and predatory intent. The dogman threatens to eat Danny, prancing and growling, a creature of pure id. This is the hotel showing Danny that human dignity has no place here. There is only appetite. Danny flees back to the bedroom, the laughter of the dogman chasing him. Huddled on his cot, Danny realizes the strategic situation. The hotel is jamming his communications. It has placed obstacles, the hedge animals, the dogman, between him and help. In a final, desperate attempt, Danny gathers every ounce of his shine, squeezing his eyes shut, and fires a mental bullet across the country. "Dick, please come quick," but the hotel swats the signal down. A vision of a prehistoric club swinging in the dark shatters Danny's concentration. The message is clear: you are alone. The lines are cut. Chapter 42. Thousands of miles away at an airport gate, the distress signal finds its target. Dick Halloran is fighting a losing battle with bureaucracy, trying to get park rangers to check on the Overlook. But he is dismissed as a crank, a voice on the phone with no proof. The frustration is palpable. The rational world cannot comprehend the supernatural siege happening in the mountains. As Halloran boards his plane, the psychic impact of Danny's scream hits him. It's not just a thought, it's a physical assault. The thought pistol goes off in his head, twisting his face in pain, smelling of phantom oranges. It is a terrifying confirmation. The connection was made, and then violently severed. Halloran knows, with the certainty of the shine, that the boy is being hunted. The plane lifts off, carrying the only hope for the Torrance family. But to Halloran, the air smells like blood and ozone. Chapter 43. Jack Torrance steps through the batwing doors of the Colorado lounge and steps out of time. The room is no longer empty. It is bustling with the ghosts of the Overlook's golden age. This isn't a hallucination. For Jack, this is the new reality. The hotel has overlaid the past onto the present, a 3D movie clicking into focus. He sits at the bar, and there is Lloyd, the archetype of the bartender, the confessor, the enabler. Lloyd is pale, corpse-like, yet the most welcome sight Jack has ever seen. The first drink, a martini, is free. Orders from the manager. The gin hits Jack's system like a revelation, dissolving the anxiety, the guilt, and the love for his family. It is the chemical keyed to his destruction. Jack looks around and sees the masquerade. He sees Horace Derwent, the bisexual millionaire, and his submissive pet, the dogman. The atmosphere is thick with decadence and cruelty. But then, the mask slips. For a moment, Jack sees Lloyd rotting, his face a landscape of sores and yellow plague. He asks about Danny, a flicker of paternal concern breaking through the gin haze. Lloyd reassures him with a smile that is both servile and sinister. The manager is interested in Danny. Danny has talent. The alcohol does its work. Jack forgets the rotting face. He forgets the danger. He slides comfortably into the role the hotel has prepared for him, the guest who never leaves. He's one of the boys again, drinking on the house while the noose tightens around his soul. Chapter 44. The party is in full swing, a kaleidoscopic nightmare of jazz, sex, and madness. Jack is dancing with a beautiful woman who smells of lilies and the grave. Time has lost its meaning. It is always midnight, always the height of the festivities. He watches Derwent humiliate Roger the dogman, commanding him to roll over and beg for a drink. It is a display of raw power and degradation, and the guests applaud. They are cheering for the destruction of the human spirit. Jack stumbles into a server, a man with a low brow and a clipped British accent. It is Grady, Delbert Grady, the caretaker who chopped his wife and daughters into pieces before blowing his own brains out. But Grady denies it with the polite detachment of a career servant. He has no recollection of such things. Here, the psychological manipulation reaches its zenith. Grady tells Jack that he has always been the caretaker. It is a statement of eternal recurrence. Jack is just the latest face on the same monster. Grady pivots to the subject of family. He admits he had to correct his wife and daughters when they interfered with his duties to the hotel. Correct is the bureaucratic euphemism for murder. Grady plants the seed. Danny is willful. Danny is bringing an outside party, the nigger cook, into the equation. Danny needs to be corrected. Jack, pliable with gin and desperate for acceptance in this glittering hierarchy, begins to agree. A man has responsibilities. A father must discipline his son. The logic of the insane becomes the only logic that makes sense. Then the clock strikes midnight. Unmask, unmask. Jack turns to the clock on the mantelpiece. Inside the glass dome, the clockwork figures act out a grim pantomime. A mechanical father strikes a mechanical son with a mallet. But the mechanism bleeds. Blood sprays against the glass, obscuring the gears. It is a vision of the immediate future, a prophecy written in gore. The horror shatters the illusion. Jack screams, begging for it to stop. And in an instant, the party vanishes. The music dies, the lights fade. Jack is left alone in the cold grey morning light of the Colorado lounge. The beautiful guests are gone. The martini is gone. He is just a drunk on the floor, bleeding from the nose, surrounded by dust sheets. But the thirst remains, and the seed Grady planted, the duty to correct his family, has taken root in the fertile soil of his intoxicated rage. He passes out, and outside, the snow seals the hotel in a white tomb. Chapter 45. The descent into Denver was less of a landing and more of a controlled fall. On TWA Flight 196, the turbulence was a physical assault, a violent shaking that turned the cabin into a capsule of shared terror. Dick Halloran sat beside a sharp-faced woman who had tried to drown her anxiety in vodka and orange juice, but as the plane lurched through the blinding white curtain of snow, alcohol offered no buffer against the fear of death. A woman across the aisle screamed that they were going to crash, articulating the silent dread of every soul on board. This is the nature of fear in high places. It strips away social pretenses. Halloran, terrified himself, exchanged a brief, human moment with his seatmate. She asked about the steel plate in his head, a lie he'd told earlier, and he reassured her, despite his own stomach doing somersaults. It's a testament to human resilience that even when facing a potential fiery end, we still try to comfort strangers. The landing was brutal, a jarring collision with the earth that sent trays clattering and nerves shattering, but they were down. Alive. As they disembarked, the sharp-faced woman offered Halloran a drink, but the urgency of his mission clawed at him. He had to get to the boy. The connection between them, that shining psychic tether, was vibrating with danger. Halloran secured a heavy Buick Electra from Hertz, choosing weight over style for the treacherous roads ahead. The storm gripping Colorado was historic, a white monster swallowing the landscape. As he drove out, he saw his seatmate one last time. She flashed him a peace sign. It was a final flicker of warmth before he plunged into the cold, isolating reality of the blizzard. The drive was a nightmare of sliding tires and near-zero visibility. The roads were a graveyard of abandoned vehicles, a warning he had to ignore. But the Overlook Hotel had defenses beyond just snow. When Halloran reached the turnpike entrance, a police barricade stopped him. The officer, screaming over the howling wind, refused to let him pass. The ramp was blocked by a jackknifed truck. Halloran was forced to take a 20-mile detour. It felt like a malicious delay, as if the elements themselves were conspiring to keep him from Danny. As he tuned the radio, the announcer's voice confirmed the hopelessness of the situation. Mountain passes were closed, but Halloran turned the radio off. Logic dictated he stop. Love and the shine dictated he drive into the teeth of the storm. Chapter 46. At the Overlook, the silence was heavy, pregnant with violence. Wendy Torrance, armed with a butcher knife hidden in her bathrobe, crept downstairs. It was a reversal of roles that shattered the domestic archetype. The homemaker had become the warrior, hunting the husband who had once been her protector. The hotel had twisted Jack Torrance, hollowing him out and filling him with its own malevolent spirits. She found him in the Colorado lounge, passed out behind the bar. The smell of gin was overwhelming, a terrifying impossibility in a dry hotel. This was the Overlook's magic at work. materializing alcohol to fuel Jack's demons. He looked small in his stupor, like an exhausted child, but when she approached, the monster woke up. Jack grabbed her ankle, his grip bruising and inhumanly strong. The mask of the husband fell away completely. He didn't just look drunk, he looked possessed. He accused her and Danny of plotting against him, projecting his own failures and the hotel's whisperings onto them. He claimed they were trying to sabotage his responsibilities. This is the psychology of the addict amplified by the supernatural. Everyone else is the villain. Only the addiction is the friend. He lunged, pinning her. He began to strangle her, his hands closing around her throat with lethal intent. Wendy was no longer fighting her husband. She was fighting a puppet of the hotel. Danny screamed from the doorway, rushing to save his mother, but Jack backhanded the boy into the shelves. As her vision faded into blackness, Wendy's hand found a straw-wrapped wine bottle on the bar. It was a desperate final grasp for survival. She brought the heavy glass down on Jack's head. The bottle shattered. The grip on her throat loosened. Jack collapsed. The giant felled. But there was no time for relief. Wendy, coughing up blood and fighting through the trauma, knew they had to secure him. She and Danny dragged Jack's unconscious body toward the kitchen. It was a grotesque procession, the wife and son hauling the patriarch like a carcass. They aimed for the pantry, a jail cell with food. Panic set in when the bolt on the pantry door stuck. It refused to slide. This was the hotel fighting back, inanimate objects resisting their survival. Jack began to stir on the floor, muttering about medicine and chastisement. Danny, his shine perhaps giving him the insight his mother lacked in her terror, saw the mechanical catch and knocked the bolt loose. They dragged Jack inside just as his eyes snapped open. He scrambled up, no longer a man but a predatory animal slashing at them. They slammed the heavy door. Jack threw his weight against it, screaming threats that curdled the blood. He wasn't Jack anymore. He threatened to bash Danny's brains in, using language so vile it severed the last threads of their family bond. Danny, pale and trembling, recognized the truth. "It's the hotel," he whispered. The entity had worn his father like a suit of skin. Chapter 47. The aftermath of violence is often a deafening silence, but at the Overlook, the silence was waiting to be filled. It was late afternoon. Wendy and Danny huddled together in the caretaker's quarters. The sounds of Jack's rage, the screaming, the battering against the pantry door, had drifted up through the dumbwaiter shaft for hours. But now, finally, it had stopped. Wendy tried to construct a fragile reality for her son, promising a fishing trip in the spring, a return to a normalcy that felt lifetimes away. It was a heartbreaking attempt to bandage a psychic wound that went down to the bone. Danny, clutching a toy car, could only weep. He knew things the adults didn't. He knew the hotel wasn't done. Around 4:30, the quiet broke. Not with a scream, but with a mechanical hum. The elevator. The sound of the elevator motor grinding to life was the heartbeat of the beast returning. It wasn't just machinery. It was the hotel waking up for the night's festivities. The crash of the brass gate opening, the phantom sounds of a party, laughter and breaking glass drifted up to them. The Overlook was alive, and it was coming for them. Chapter 48. Inside the pantry, Jack Torrance sat amidst the ruins of his dignity, eating crackers. The physical pain of his hangover was immense, but the psychological warping was far worse. He sat there rationalizing his violence, aligning himself with the memory of his own abusive father. He told himself he was the victim, the only one with the grit to do what was necessary. The hotel preyed on this insecurity, this toxic masculinity that equated discipline with brutality. Then a voice spoke from the other side of the door. It wasn't Wendy. It was Grady, the ghost of the former caretaker who had murdered his own family years prior. Grady was the voice of the administration, the Overlook's middle management. He chided Jack. humiliated him, questioning if he had the belly for the job. The manipulation was masterfully cruel. Grady wasn't just taunting him, he was offering him a membership to an exclusive club, provided Jack could pay the dues, and the dues were the lives of his wife and son. Jack, desperate for acceptance and broken by his addiction, swore he would do it. He promised to correct them. The bolt on the pantry door, which Wendy had secured so tightly, snapped back. The door creaked open. There was no one there. The hotel had physically intervened to release its executioner. Jack stepped out into the kitchen. Grady was gone, but he had left gifts. On the chopping block sat a martini glass, a bottle of gin, and a dish of olives. And leaning against the block was a roquet mallet, a heavy, long-handled wooden hammer used for croquet. It was a weapon of blunt force trauma. Jack drank the gin, the fire of it sealing his pact. He picked up the mallet, he hefted it, testing its swing. The writer was gone. The killer had arrived. Chapter 49. Miles away, Dick Halloran was fighting a losing battle against geography. The storm had turned the world into a white void. On a winding mountain road, his Buick drifted. A snowplow appeared out of the blindness, looming like a juggernaut. Halloran swerved, the car spinning helplessly on the ice, sliding toward a drop-off that meant certain death. The car stopped with its nose hanging over the abyss, caught on the fragile lip of the road. Halloran was alive, but only just. The plow driver, a man named Howard Cottrell, stopped to help. In the midst of the freezing hell, this was a spark of humanity. Cottrell pulled the Buick back onto the road and even gave Halloran a pair of hand-knitted mittens. It was a moment of grace, a reminder that outside the Overlook sphere of influence, goodness still existed. Cottrell warned him that the roads to the hotel were impassable, that the Overlook was shut down for the winter. But he sensed Halloran's urgency. He directed him to a garage in Sidewinder where he could rent a snowmobile. They shared a look, a subtle acknowledgement of the shine. Cottrell had a touch of it, enough to know Halloran was on a mission of life or death. Halloran drove on, reaching the town of Sidewinder hours later. Darkness had fallen. He was close now, only miles from the hotel. The urgency was a physical pain in his chest. And then the Overlook struck him. It wasn't a physical blow, but a psychic sledgehammer. As he drove past the road-closed signs, a massive force slammed into his mind. It smelled of roasting oranges and death. It was a voice of pure, concentrated hatred, screaming racial slurs and threats of lynching. The hotel didn't just want him to turn back, it wanted him dead. It projected images of violence, of burning, screaming at him to get out, to die, to leave its prey alone. The sheer force of the telepathic assault caused Halloran to lose control. The Buick smashed into a snowbank. He sat there, gasping, traumatized by the venomous intrusion. The hotel knew he was coming. It was afraid of him, or at least it wanted no interference in the ritual it was enacting with the Torrance family. Halloran shook off the terror, reversed the car, and kept driving. He was the cavalry, and he was late. Chapter 50. The silence in the Overlook Hotel is not a peace. It is a predator holding its breath. Wendy Torrance stands in the bedroom watching over her sleeping son, paralyzed by a malefic hush. The sensory overload of the hotel's ghostly party has ceased, replaced by a vacuum of sound that is infinitely worse. She is gripped by the terrifying uncertainty of whether the supernatural events are real or a shared psychosis, but the physical reality of her fear is undeniable, manifested in a fingernail she has unknowingly torn from her own hand. There is a psychological unraveling happening here. Wendy hears phantom voices from the kitchen, Jack conspiring with the hotel to murder them. It is the paranoia of the isolated, the mind filling the void with its worst nightmares. Driven by a desperate need to know if her husband is still locked in the pantry, she arms herself with a knife and steps out into the corridor. The descent down the stairs is a journey into the belly of the beast. The hotel plays with her, offering glimpses of streamers and confetti in the elevator, remnants of a party for the damned. As she reaches the lobby, the clock begins to strike. It isn't just marking time, it is a countdown. At the stroke of 12, the ballroom explodes with light and the brassy command, "Unmask." This is the Overlook, stripping away the veneer of humanity. Jack appears, but the man she married has been eroded. He is a puppet now, wielding a roquet mallet, grinning a joyless, murderous grin. The violence that follows is visceral and clumsy. It isn't the clean choreography of an action movie. It is the messy, agonizing brutality of domestic horror, amplified by possession. Jack shatters her ribs, breaks her knee, and taunts her with the promise of her medicine. But the Overlook underestimates the primal instinct of a mother. As Jack moves for the kill, Wendy drives the kitchen knife deep into his lower back. The scream that tears from his throat belongs to the hotel itself, a vibration of wood and stone. Jack collapses, a dark stain spreading on his flannel shirt. Wendy, broken and gasping, begins the agonizing crawl up the stairs, but the horror of the revenant is that it does not stay down. Jack rises, the knife still protruding from his spine, a grotesque testament to the supernatural energy fueling him. He follows her, a relentless juggernaut of pain and malice. Chapter 51. While the domestic nightmare unfolds inside, a different battle rages in the storm outside. Dick Halloran has secured a snowmobile, racing against the blizzard to save the boy who shines. The narrative shifts here from the claustrophobia of the hotel to the agoraphobia of the whiteout. The isolation is total. Halloran fights the wind and his own terror, the psychic weight of the Overlook pressing on his mind miles before he even reaches the grounds. When he finally arrives, the hotel's defenses activate. The topiary animals, which Jack dismissed as hallucinations, reveal their lethal reality. A hedge lion, a monstrosity of frozen twigs and malice, attacks him. This is a crucial distinction in the law. The hotel can manifest physical force through these constructs. Halloran is mauled, the reality of the claws tearing through his parka and flesh, dispelling any notion that this is merely a mental battle. He is battered, bleeding, and pinned down in the snow, screaming denial at a monster that is all too real. Chapter 52. Back inside, the chase ascends. Wendy drags her broken body up the stairs, fueled by adrenaline and terror. Jack is close behind, grinning through the blood, the mallet a pendulum of death. The hotel mocks Wendy with jump scares, a ghost in a ghoul mask popping out of a room, disorienting her as she crawls towards sanctuary. She reaches the apartment and locks the door, but the sanctuary is empty. Danny is gone. This discovery breaks her more than the mallet ever could. The psychological torture is peak king here. The fear of the physical threat outside the door is eclipsed by the terror of the missing child. Jack, seemingly unbothered by the knife in his back, begins to demolish the door. He is no longer Jack Torrance. He is a force of nature, a battering ram. Wendy retreats to the bathroom, but there is no escape. The scene mirrors the relentless encroachment of insanity. Jack breaks through, his face a mask of blood and madness, spewing the hotel's hateful rhetoric. Wendy, cornered and desperate, weaponizes the mundane. She finds razor blades in the medicine cabinet. When Jack's hand snakes through the broken door to unlock it, she slashes him. It is a gritty, nasty survival tactic. The pain registers, but what actually stops the assault is a sound from outside, the high-pitched whine of a snowmobile engine. The hotel, sensing a new player on the board, redirects its puppet. Jack leaves to deal with the interloper, leaving Wendy to collapse into a grey haze of semi-consciousness. Chapter 53. Halloran is down but not out. The hedge lion circles for the kill. In a moment of desperate improvisation, Halloran douses the creature with gasoline and uses his old Zippo lighter, a talisman of his past reliability, to set it ablaze. The fire creates a stark contrast to the freezing death of the storm. The hedge beast is consumed, becoming a writhing pyre that collapses into ash. Beaten and concussed, Halloran forces himself to the hotel. He finds the lobby painted in blood, the trail leading upstairs. The psychic silence is deafening. The hotel is hiding its occupants from him. He rushes up the stairs, driven by love for Danny, but he makes a fatal error. He forgets he is entering a trap. Jack, crouching in the elevator like a spider, ambushes him. There is no conversation, no recognition of their shared humanity. Jack, the vessel of the Overlook, strikes Halloran down with the mallet, shattering his jaw and cheekbone. The savior has fallen. It is a bleak subversion of the cavalry arrives trope. The Overlook has neutralized the physical threat of Wendy and the psychic physical threat of Halloran. Now, only the boy remains. Chapter 54. Danny is not in the physical world. He is deep within the corridors of his own mind, communing with Tony. Here the lore expands significantly. Tony reveals his true nature. He is not a ghost or an imaginary friend. He is Danny, the adult Daniel Anthony Torrance, calling back from the future to save his younger self. He explains that the Overlook is a place where time is fluid, a trap designed to consume them. He warns Danny that his father is gone, consumed by the entity that wears his face. Danny wakes from this trance on the third floor of the real hotel. The veil is thin here. He sees the false faces, ghosts of mobsters and rotting women, trying to terrify him into submission. But Danny sees through them now. He understands they are masks. However, the physical threat remains. The elevator crashes open. Jack steps out, cooing for his son, the mallet dragging behind him. The hotel has shed all subtlety. It is a hunt now. Danny runs for the one escape route he remembers, the attic trapdoor. He reaches the end of the corridor, grabbing the pole to pull down the ladder, only to find the ultimate betrayal of foresight. The trapdoor is locked. A padlock, placed there by his father weeks ago to protect him, now seals his doom. Trapped in a cul-de-sac, Danny backs against the wall as the thing wearing his father's face comes around the corner, raising the mallet to finish the job. Chapter 55. Wendy Torrance drifted back to consciousness, the grey fog of fainting replaced by the visceral, stabbing reality of broken ribs and a shattered life. Pain was her anchor now. She found herself amidst the ruins of the caretaker's apartment, the air thick with the metallic tang of fresh blood. It wasn't just her injury. It was the realization that the nightmare hadn't ended while she slept. It had escalated. She dragged herself into the hallway, driven by the primal need to protect Danny. What she found was Dick Halloran, the savior they had prayed for, crumpled and broken against the wall. The Overlook doesn't play fair. It doesn't allow for heroes to simply ride in and save the day. Halloran was alive, but barely, his face a ruin of bruises, a testament to the brutal physical power the hotel now exercised through Jack's body. Upstairs, the psychological horror reached its zenith. Danny stood his ground, not against his father, but against the mask wearing his father's face. This is the crucial separation in King's narrative, the realization that Jack Torrance is gone. The creature wielding the Roque mallet was a grotesque caricature, a puppet of the hotel screaming about discipline and duty. Danny, possessing a clarity far beyond his years, saw through the deception. He challenged the monster, stripping away its power by denying its identity. It wasn't his daddy. It was a false face. The creature faltered. For a moment, the human Jack resurfaced in a heartbreaking plea for his son to run, a final spark of paternal love breaking through the possession before being extinguished forever. The entity, regaining control, prepared for the killing blow. But in its arrogance, in its obsession with consuming the boy's shine, the hotel had succumbed to the very human flaw of negligence. Danny remembered what the entity had forgotten. The boiler. The pressure had been building all winter, a ticking time bomb in the basement that mirrored the building psychological pressure in Jack's mind. When Danny screamed the truth, that the boiler was about to blow, the monster's mask crumbled into pure terror. It wasn't fear of death, but fear of losing the prize. The entity fled, abandoning the boy to save its physical vessel, proving ultimately that its hunger for survival outweighed its desire for murder. Chapter 56. The descent of the elevator marked the final countdown. Halloran, shaking off the concussion and the agony of a broken jaw, understood the urgency in Danny's mind. The shine communicated what words could not. The image of the Overlook blowing sky high. There was no time for reunions or explanations, only the desperate adrenaline-fueled drive for survival. In the basement, the entity that had been Jack Torrance arrived too late. This moment underscores the tragic irony of the Overlook's downfall. It had manipulated everything to perfection, isolated its victims, and broken their spirits. Yet it was undone by the mundane mechanics of a neglected furnace. The creature tried to turn the release valve, its hands searing against the red-hot metal, but the pressure was too great. The needle was buried. The hotel's hubris had literally overheated. As Halloran carried Wendy and Danny through the lobby, the explosion ripped the heart out of the building. It wasn't just a fire, it was a death scream. The blast wave acted as a physical shove, launching them from the porch into the snow, a violent birth expelling them from the womb of the monster just as it consumed itself. The boiler, the beating heart of the hotel's corruption, had finally stopped. Chapter 57. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic mix of relief and lingering terror. The explosion didn't just destroy the structure, it severed the supernatural connections. The hedge animals, those leafy, impossible guardians, flattened and died, their spirits fleeing as the vessel that sustained them turned to ash. Halloran, acting on instinct and pain, mobilized the survivors. There is a stark contrast here between the inferno consuming the hotel and the biting, indifferent cold of the winter night. They were caught between fire and ice. As they sped away on the snowmobile, looking back at the funeral pyre of the Overlook, Halloran witnessed the final departure of the evil. He saw a shape like a great manta ray rise from the flames, a hive mind of ghosts, a cloud of hornets whose nest had been destroyed, dissipating into the wind. The entity was not killed, merely unhoused, scattering into the void. But the trauma of the Overlook leaves marks that don't fade like smoke. In the equipment shed, before their final exit, Halloran had been tempted by a mallet, a dark whisper urging him to finish what Jack started. It was a final weak attempt by the hotel's lingering influence to infect a new host. Halloran rejected it, choosing humanity over violence, solidifying his role as the true guardian. They rode away into the darkness, leaving the burning husk of the Overlook to collapse into its own cellar, a hell consuming itself. Chapter 58. Summer brought healing, but not forgetting. In the quiet of a Maine resort, the physical wounds had begun to scar over, but the psychological landscape had been permanently altered. Wendy was stiff and aged by her injuries. Danny was a boy who fished in silence, his eyes holding shadows no child should know. Halloran sat with Danny on the dock, offering the only wisdom that matters in the face of such senseless tragedy. He didn't offer platitudes about everything being okay. Instead, he offered the hard truth. The world is a hard place that doesn't care if you live or die, and good people suffer pain they don't deserve. The victory lies simply in continuing, in grieving, and then getting on. It was a moment of profound connection. Danny, traumatized and grieving the father he loved, and the father who tried to kill him, found a surrogate in Dick. The horror was over, but the shine remained, a burden Danny would have to carry forever. As they reeled in a fish under the summer sun, the scene felt like a deep exhale after a long time holding one's breath, a fragile piece, won at a terrible cost. But ghosts do not simply vanish when the building burns. The story of Danny Torrance did not end on that dock. It merely transitioned into a different kind of haunting. 3 years later, the remnants of the Overlook found him in Florida. The shine acted as a beacon, drawing the hungry spirits that had been attached to the hotel. The rotting woman from room 217 sat in their tenement bathroom waiting. It was a terrifying realization. The physical location was destroyed, but the entities were parasitic, latching onto Danny's light. It was Halloran who provided the solution, teaching Danny the concept of the lockbox. This mental discipline allowed Danny to entrap these horrors in the vault of his mind, turning his memory into a prison for the Overlook's refugees. He learned to lock them away one by one. Time, however, is a cruel editor. We jump forward to find Dan Torrance as a man, and the tragedy is that he has become the very thing he feared most. To dull the blinding brightness of his shine, to keep the lockboxes shut and the voices quiet, Dan turned to the same medication his father used: alcohol. The hereditary curse wasn't just the supernatural ability, it was the addiction. Dan became a drifter, a man purely of the now, washing away his trauma with booze and bad decisions. He became Dr. Sleep, a nickname earned in a hospice where he used his fading abilities to comfort the dying, but in his personal life, he was drowning. He hit rock bottom after waking up from a blackout, haunted not by ghosts, but by his own shame and the memory of a starving toddler he encountered during a bender. Realizing he was sliding into the same abyss that swallowed Jack Torrance, Dan made a choice his father never could. He boarded a bus to New Hampshire, leaving the bottle behind. It was a desperate bid for redemption, an attempt to break the cycle of destruction. The Overlook was gone, but the war for Danny Torrance's soul was only just entering its second act. Thank you for spending this time in the Overlook Hotel with me tonight. If you enjoyed exploring this dark world, please subscribe to Horror Tales, where we dive into the lore of Stephen King novels every week. I hope you rest well. Good night.